Picture this: Salem Village, Massachusetts. Winter of 1692. The kind of cold that burns your lungs with every breath. The kind of darkness that makes shadows move where nothing stands. A 14-year-old girl lies awake in her bed, listening to the sound of footsteps approaching her door. Not one pair. When the knock comes, it sounds like thunder. When the door opens, she sees torches, flames reflecting in the eyes of her neighbors, people she has known her entire life. And in that moment, she knows her childhood is over. They will call her a witch. They will say she danced with the devil in the forest at midnight. They will swear under oath that her spirit left her body to torment them in their sleep, to poison their livestock, to curse their children. The evidence against her will be dreams and rumors and the word of hysterical accusers who convulse on command. She will stand trial before men who have already decided she is guilty. She will face a choice that no child should ever face: confess to a lie and live in shame, or tell the truth and hang from a rope. This is not a fairy tale. This is not a story about magic or monsters. This is about Elizabeth Howe, a girl who survived one of history's darkest chapters. A girl who learned that the real horror is not witchcraft or demons. The real horror is what human beings will do to each other when fear becomes faith, when suspicion becomes certainty, when neighbors become executioners. Tonight, we will walk with her through the fire, and we will ask the question that still haunts us 3 centuries later. How do you survive when an entire town wants you dead? Picture this: Salem Village, Massachusetts. February the 29th, 1692, a leap year, a day that should not exist, the kind of night where the cold seeps through walls like water through a sieve. The kind of darkness where you cannot tell where your room ends and the void begins. You are 14 years old. Your name is Elizabeth Howe, and you are about to learn that childhood is not a right. It is a privilege that can be revoked in an instant. You lie awake in your bed, staring at the ceiling beams your father carved when you were still small enough to believe the world was safe. Outside, the wind howls through the bare trees like something dying. You pull your thin blanket closer, not because you are cold, because you heard something. Footsteps, many footsteps. The crunch of frozen earth under boots. Voices, low and urgent, getting closer. Your mother is downstairs. You hear her gasp. A man's voice, loud and commanding. More voices joining in, a chorus of accusation. Your heart begins to race. You know these voices. Mr. Putnam from the farm next door. Goodwife Walcott, who used to bring you apple tarts. Reverend Paris, whose sermons about sin and damnation have been getting longer and stranger with each passing week. They are not here for apple tarts tonight. The door to your room crashes open. No knock, no warning, just violence. Your mother stands in the doorway, her face pale as milk in the candlelight. Behind her, shadows. Men with torches. Women with faces twisted by something that looks like fear, but smells like rage. They do not look at you like you are a child. They look at you like you are a thing, a problem, a disease that needs to be cut out. Elizabeth Howe, Reverend Paris speaks your name like a curse. You are accused of witchcraft, of consorting with the devil, of tormenting the innocent with your evil arts. The words hang in the air like smoke. You open your mouth to speak, to deny, to scream, but nothing comes out. Because you know, in that moment, that words will not save you. The decision has already been made. This is not the story you think you know. You have heard about the Salem witch trials in school. You know the broad strokes. Some girls had fits, people panicked, innocent people died. But that sanitized version strips away the true horror. This is not a story about superstition or ignorance. This is a story about what happens when a community decides it needs a villain. When fear becomes permission. When your neighbors become your executioners. Before we descend deeper into this darkness, I want to ask you something. If you believe these forgotten chapters of history deserve to be remembered, if you believe the voices of the condemned should still be heard 3 centuries later, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Echoes of the Old World. Your support keeps the candle burning in the archives. It allows us to keep pulling these stories from the shadows where they have been buried. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are? This is a story best told in darkness. Elizabeth Howe. Howe was not the first. She would not be the last. But her story is different. Because Elizabeth did something most of the accused could not do. She survived. And tonight, we will trace every step of her nightmare. We will examine the twisted logic that nearly killed her. We will walk with her through the courtroom where children became judges and dreams became evidence. And we will discover the brutal choice she made to stay alive. Let us step back. Let us understand how we arrived at this moment. Salem Village in 1692 was not a place of peace. It was a powder keg. The winter had been brutal. Crops had failed. Children were dying of diseases no one could name. The war with the French and their Native American allies to the north had created a constant stream of refugees, each one bringing tales of massacres and burning villages. People were terrified, and terror needs a target. Enter Reverend Samuel Parris, a man who saw demons in every shadow. A man whose 9-year-old daughter Betty and 11-year-old niece Abigail had begun having strange fits, screaming, thrashing, claiming invisible hands were pinching them, claiming they could see specters of townspeople tormenting them in their sleep. Modern doctors would likely diagnose hysteria, perhaps ergot poisoning from contaminated rye bread. But Reverend Parris saw witchcraft, and once he named it, once he gave the fear a shape, there was no stopping it. The accusations began slowly. A slave woman named Tituba, an elderly beggar named Sarah Good, women on the margins, women no one would miss. But fear is never satisfied with easy targets. Fear grows, it spreads, it hungers. And soon, the accusations reached Elizabeth Howe, a girl from a respectable family, a girl who had never caused trouble, a girl whose only crime was existing in a town that needed more witches to burn. What was the evidence against Elizabeth? Let me list it for you. And as I do, I want you to remember that this was considered sufficient to condemn a child to death. First, Mercy Lewis, one of the afflicted girls, claimed that Elizabeth's specter visited her in her bedroom, that the ghost of Elizabeth pinched her and choked her and tried to force her to sign the devil's book. Second, John Howe, no relation to Elizabeth, testified that his cattle had died mysteriously after Elizabeth walked past his farm. Third, Elizabeth had a birthmark on her left shoulder. In 1692, birthmarks were considered the devil's mark, proof of a covenant with darkness. That was it. That was the evidence. Dreams, dead cows, a birthmark, and on the strength of these accusations, Elizabeth was dragged from her home in chains. She was 14 years old. She had never been more than 10 miles from Salem Village. And now she was being marched to a jail cell to await trial for a crime that did not exist. The jail was not designed for long-term imprisonment. It was a holding pen, a place to keep the accused until they could be processed. The cells were tiny, freezing, crawling with rats and lice. Elizabeth was chained to the wall, the irons cut into her wrists and ankles. She could not stand fully upright. She could not lie down completely flat. She could only crouch in the darkness and listen to the sounds of other prisoners crying and praying and slowly going mad. Days passed, maybe weeks. Time loses meaning in absolute darkness. Elizabeth was not alone in her cell. Other accused witches were packed in beside her. Women who swore they were innocent. Women who had confessed to save their lives. Women who had gone silent, their minds broken by the horror of what was happening. And through the walls, Elizabeth could hear the screams of those being questioned. The magistrates had ways of extracting confessions, ways that did not require torture, officially, ways that were far more insidious. Sleep deprivation, standing for hours without rest, endless interrogation, the same questions over and over until you could no longer remember what the truth was. And always, always, the promise: confess and you might live. Deny and you will certainly hang. Elizabeth listened to those screams and knew her turn was coming. She listened and tried to prepare herself for what she would say, for what she would do, for the impossible choice she would have to make. But there was something else Elizabeth did not know yet, something that would determine whether she lived or died. The witch hunt was escalating. The afflicted girls had tasted power. They had learned they could point at anyone and watch them be dragged away in chains. They had become drunk on it. And the magistrates, men like Judge William Stoughton and Judge Samuel Sewell, had become convinced they were fighting a war against Satan himself. They would not stop until every witch in Massachusetts had been found and destroyed. Elizabeth Howe, 14 years old, chained in a frozen cell, accused of crimes she did not commit based on evidence that would be laughable if it were not lethal. This was her world now. This was the nightmare she would have to navigate. And the worst part? The very worst part? She was one of the lucky ones. Because Elizabeth would survive this. But not everyone would. Not even close. The night the shadows came for Elizabeth. How was the night her life split into before and after? Before, she was a child who believed in the basic goodness of people. After, she would know the truth. That the real monsters do not hide in the woods or lurk in the darkness. They sit in church. They live next door. They wear the faces of the righteous. And they will kill you while calling it God's work. To understand how a child could be condemned to death based on dreams and rumors, we must first understand the world that created the witch hunt. Salem Village in 1692 was not a peaceful New England hamlet of white picket fences and Sunday dinners. It was a community on the edge of collapse. A place where every shadow hid a threat, where survival itself felt like a gamble against invisible forces. Let us paint the picture accurately. The winter of 1691 into 1692 was brutal. The kind of cold that killed livestock and children with equal indifference. The kind of hunger that made people do desperate things. Crops had failed. Food stores were running low. In the meeting house, Reverend Parris preached longer and longer sermons about God's judgment and the sins of the community. People listened because they needed an explanation for their suffering. They needed someone to blame. But the cold and the hunger were not the only problems. Salem Village sat on the frontier. To the north and west, war raged. King William's War, they called it. The French and their Native American allies attacking English settlements, burning villages, taking captives. The survivors fled south, bringing stories of unimaginable horrors. Stories of families slaughtered in their beds, of children taken into the wilderness, never to be seen again. Salem Village absorbed these refugees and their trauma. Fear became the air they breathed. Now add religion to this volatile mixture. These were Puritans, people who believed that the devil was real and active in the world, people who saw signs and portents in everything from a deformed calf to a child's nightmare. People who believed that God rewarded the righteous and punished the wicked in this life, not just the next. So when bad things happened, when crops failed and children died and war came closer, there could only be one explanation: sin. Someone in the community was in league with Satan. Someone was bringing God's wrath down upon them all. Enter the children. In January of 1692, 2 girls in Reverend Parris's household began exhibiting strange behavior. Betty Parris, 9 years old, and Abigail Williams, 11 years old. They would suddenly scream and fall to the ground. They would contort their bodies into impossible positions. They would claim that invisible hands were pinching and choking them. They would babble in tongues and hide under furniture and throw things across the room. The local doctor, William Griggs, examined them. He found no physical cause for their affliction. No fever, no injury, no disease he could name. And so he pronounced the diagnosis that everyone feared and secretly expected: the evil hand, witchcraft. The girls were bewitched. And once that word was spoken, once that possibility was named, there was no taking it back. The fits spread. Other girls began showing the same symptoms. Ann Putnam Jr., 12 years old. Mercy Lewis, 19. Elizabeth Hubbard, 17. Mary Walcott, 16. Within weeks, there were nearly a dozen afflicted girls, all claiming to be tormented by invisible specters, all pointing fingers at specific people in the community, all giving testimony that would send their neighbors to the gallows. Modern historians have proposed many explanations for what happened to these girls. Some suggest ergot poisoning from contaminated rye bread, which can cause hallucinations and convulsions. Others point to mass hysteria, a psychological phenomenon where symptoms spread through a population like a contagion. Still others suggest deliberate fraud, girls who discovered they could wield enormous power by playing the victim. The truth is probably some combination of all three. But in 1692, there was only one explanation that mattered: witchcraft. And here is where the fever truly began. Because the afflicted girls were not satisfied with accusing the usual suspects. They started with the easy targets. Tituba, Reverend Parris's slave from Barbados. Sarah Good, a homeless beggar who smoked a pipe and muttered to herself. Sarah Osborne, an elderly woman who rarely came to church. These were women on the margins, women whose accusation would not tear the community apart. Women who could be sacrificed to calm the panic. But it did not calm the panic. It fed it. Because now the magistrates had confessions. Tituba, terrified of being executed, told them exactly what they wanted to hear. Yes, she had seen the devil. Yes, he appeared to her as a tall man in black. Yes, there were other witches in Salem Village. Many others. A whole coven of them. And the afflicted girls, seeing that their accusations were believed, grew bolder. They began pointing at people higher up the social ladder. Respectable women, church members, even the wife of a minister. The trials began in March. Special courts were established. Judges were appointed. Men like William Stoughton, a cold and ruthless magistrate who believed every word the afflicted girls spoke. Men like Samuel Sewell, who would later come to regret his role, but in the moment was convinced he was doing God's work. These men did not see themselves as monsters. They saw themselves as warriors in a cosmic battle. They believed they were saving souls by destroying bodies. The courtroom procedure was a mockery of justice. The accused would be brought in chains before the magistrates. The afflicted girls would be present, often sitting in a special section where everyone could see them. The accused would be asked to recite the Lord's Prayer. Any stumble, any hesitation, was taken as proof of guilt because everyone knew witches could not speak holy words correctly. The accused would be asked to look at the afflicted girls, and the moment they made eye contact, the girls would scream and fall into fits, claiming the witch's gaze was tormenting them. This was the evidence. This was what passed for proof in Salem Village in 1692. Spectral evidence, they called it. The testimony of the afflicted that they could see the accused person's spirit leaving their body to torment them. It did not matter if the accused had an alibi. It did not matter if dozens of people testified to their good character. Because the devil could make your specter appear anywhere, even while your body slept peacefully in bed. There was no defense, no way to prove innocence. The accusation itself was proof of guilt. But there was one way to save yourself. One escape hatch in this nightmare logic. Confess. Admit you were a witch. Name other witches. Beg for forgiveness. Those who confessed were spared, not freed, but kept alive in prison as valuable witnesses against others. Those who maintained their innocence were hanged. The message was clear. Truth will get you killed. Only lies can save you. By the time Elizabeth Howe was arrested in late February, the machinery of the witch hunt was running at full speed. Arrests were happening daily. The jails were overflowing. The magistrates were working overtime to process the accused. And the afflicted girls had become celebrities of a sort. People came from miles around to watch them perform their fits in court, to see them point their fingers and watch another witch be dragged away. It had become entertainment, a public spectacle, a ritual sacrifice to calm a terrified community. This was the world Elizabeth woke up to. A world where your neighbor could condemn you with a dream, where a magistrate could sentence you to death based on testimony that would be laughed out of any modern courtroom, where the only path to survival was to abandon your integrity and confess to crimes you did not commit. This was not the distant past. This was 333 years ago, within living memory of the founding of America, in a place that would eventually pride itself on freedom and justice. The fever that ate Salem Village did not come from nowhere. It was built on a foundation of fear, trauma, religious extremism, and social tension. It was enabled by a legal system that abandoned reason in favor of superstition. It was perpetuated by people who convinced themselves they were righteous even as they sent innocent neighbors to their deaths. The monster was not supernatural. The monster was human, and it wore the face of justice. Let us now examine the evidence that would condemn Elizabeth Howe to death. Let us look at the logic, if we can call it that, which allowed dreams to become testimony and rumors to become truth. This is where the true horror of the Salem witch trials reveals itself. Not in supernatural evil, but in the systematic abandonment of reason by people who should have known better. Spectral evidence. These two words would seal the fate of dozens of innocent people. The concept was simple and utterly insane. The afflicted girls claimed they could see the specters, the ghostly forms of the accused witches tormenting them. Even when the accused was miles away, even when dozens of witnesses could vouch for their whereabouts, it did not matter. Because according to the theology of the time, the devil could assume someone's shape and send it out to do evil, while the person's physical body remained innocent and unaware. Think about the implications of this for a moment. It meant there was no possible defense. You could be asleep in your bed with your entire family as witnesses and still be guilty of tormenting someone across town. You could be in church, praying, and be accused of dancing with the devil in the forest at that exact moment. Your alibi meant nothing. Your character meant nothing. Your protests of innocence meant nothing. Because the devil was a liar. And of course, a witch would deny being a witch. The first piece of evidence against Elizabeth came from Mercy Lewis. Mercy was 19 years old, one of the oldest of the afflicted girls. She had survived a Native American raid that killed her parents when she was a child. She now worked as a servant in the household of Thomas Putnam, one of the leading figures driving the witch hunt, and Mercy claimed that Elizabeth Howe's specter visited her bedroom at night. Here is what Mercy testified under oath. On the night of February the 27th, she awoke to find Elizabeth standing at the foot of her bed. Not the real Elizabeth, but her ghostly form. The specter smiled at her, Mercy said, a terrible smile that showed too many teeth. Then it reached out with cold, dead hands and began to choke her. Mercy struggled. She prayed. She called out to God, and eventually, the specter vanished, leaving Mercy gasping for breath with red marks on her throat. Was Mercy lying? Was she hallucinating? Was she having a nightmare so vivid she believed it was real? We will never know. But here is what we do know. Elizabeth Howe had never met Mercy Lewis. They did not know each other. Elizabeth had no reason to wish Mercy harm. And on the night in question, Elizabeth was home with her family, miles away from the Putnam household. None of this mattered. The court accepted Mercy's testimony as fact. The dream was evidence. The nightmare was proof. The second piece of evidence came from John Howe. No relation to Elizabeth, just an unfortunate coincidence of names. John owned a small farm on the outskirts of Salem Village. He testified that 3 weeks before Elizabeth's arrest, she had walked past his property. He had seen her clearly. She had looked at his cattle, just looked at them, said nothing, did nothing, simply looked. And 2 days later, 2 of his cows died. This was it. This was sufficient evidence in the eyes of the court. A girl walked past some cows. The cows died days later. Therefore, the girl was a witch who had cursed the cows. Never mind that cattle die all the time from disease, from bad feed, from the brutal winter. Never mind that Elizabeth had no motive to harm John Howe's livestock. Never mind that there was no actual evidence of anything supernatural occurring. The sequence of events was enough. After, therefore because of. The oldest logical fallacy in human history, and the Salem magistrates embraced it without question. But the most damning evidence, the piece that truly terrified Elizabeth, was the birthmark. When she was arrested, she was subjected to a physical examination. A group of women, appointed by the court, stripped her naked and searched her body for the devil's mark. Any mole, any birthmark, any scar or blemish could be interpreted as proof that Satan had claimed her, that she had signed his book and received his mark in return. Elizabeth had a birthmark on her left shoulder. A small dark spot present since birth, something millions of people have, something completely normal and meaningless. But to the examining women, influenced by the hysteria of the moment, it was the devil's mark. They reported their findings to the magistrates. The magistrates recorded it in their notes, and Elizabeth's fate was sealed. She bore the mark of Satan. The physical evidence confirmed what the spectral evidence had already proven. She was a witch. Let us pause here and consider the utter absurdity of this system. Dreams were accepted as testimony. Dead livestock was accepted as evidence of supernatural murder. A birthmark was accepted as a satanic signature. But you know what was not accepted? The testimony of Elizabeth's family that she was home on the night Mercy claimed to be attacked. The testimony of her neighbors that she was a good Christian girl who attended church faithfully. The testimony of Elizabeth herself, begging the court to believe her innocence. All of this was dismissed, because witches lie. The devil is the father of lies, and therefore, any defense was automatically suspect. The examining magistrates had developed a set of tests to identify witches. These tests, they believed, were foolproof. They were based on centuries of witch-hunting tradition, imported from Europe, where the persecution had been even more savage. Let me describe some of them. And as I do, I want you to imagine being 14 years old and facing these accusations. Test 1. Recite the Lord's Prayer. Simple, right? Except you are terrified. You are sleep-deprived. You are chained. You are surrounded by hostile faces. And you know that one mistake, one stumbled word, will be taken as proof that you are in league with Satan. Elizabeth was made to recite the prayer multiple times. Each time the magistrates listened for any error, any hesitation. Because witches, they believed, could not speak holy words without the devil interfering. Test 2. Look at your accusers. The afflicted girls would be brought into the room. Elizabeth would be ordered to look at them. And the moment she made eye contact, the girls would scream. They would fall to the floor in convulsions. They would claim that Elizabeth's gaze was like knives cutting into their flesh, like fire burning their skin. And the magistrates would watch this performance and nod sagely. Here was proof. Here was evidence of witchcraft happening in real time, right before their eyes. Test 3. Touch the afflicted. This was based on the theory that a witch's touch would break the spell. Elizabeth would be ordered to place her hands on the convulsing girls. Sometimes they would immediately stop their fits and stand up, claiming the witch had released them. Other times they would scream louder, claiming the touch burned them. Either way, it was proof. Stopping the fit meant she had the power to control it. Continuing the fit meant she was trying to hurt them further. There was no winning. Every outcome confirmed guilt. The magistrates kept meticulous records. They wrote down every accusation, every testimony, every detail of every examination. They believed they were creating a legal record. They believed they were following proper procedure. They believed, right up until the end, that they were doing the right thing. This is what makes the Salem witch trials so terrifying. It was not chaos. It was not a mob running wild. It was a systematic, organized, legally sanctioned persecution. Evil dressed in the robes of justice. Elizabeth sat in her cell and listened to the sounds of other prisoners being interrogated. She heard the questions, the accusations, the desperate denials, and she heard the silence that followed when someone finally broke and confessed. She knew what was coming. She knew that soon, very soon, it would be her turn to face the magistrates, her turn to stand before the court and answer for crimes she did not commit, her turn to choose between truth and survival. The evidence against Elizabeth Howe was a nightmare. But it was a nightmare that dozens of other people were also living. By the spring of 1692, over 100 people had been arrested for witchcraft in Salem and the surrounding communities. The jails were overflowing. The magistrates were working day and night. And the afflicted girls, drunk on their power, kept pointing fingers, kept claiming to see specters, kept sending their neighbors to the gallows. The fever had not broken. It was getting worse. The day of Elizabeth's examination arrived like an execution. She was dragged from her cell in chains, blinking against sunlight she had not seen in weeks. The irons had cut deep wounds into her wrists and ankles. Her clothes were filthy. Her hair was matted. She looked like the monster they accused her of being. This was intentional. This was part of the theater. The meeting house had been converted into a courtroom. But this was not a place of justice. This was a stage. A performance space where the drama of good versus evil would be enacted for the entertainment and edification of the community. Every bench was packed. People had come from miles around to watch the witch girl face her accusers, to see if she would confess or damn herself with denials, to witness the power of righteousness crushing darkness. At the front of the room sat the magistrates. Judge William Stoughton presided, a tall man with cold eyes and a voice like winter. Judge Samuel Sewell sat beside him, less severe but no less committed to the proceedings. These were not stupid men. They were educated. They had studied law and theology. They believed absolutely in what they were doing. They believed they were saving souls by destroying bodies. They believed God was watching and approving. To the left of the judges sat the afflicted girls: Mercy Lewis, Ann Putnam, Mary Walcott, Elizabeth Hubbard, Abigail Williams. They wore their Sunday best. They sat primly with their hands folded. They looked like angels, and they would perform like demons, because this was their power. This was their moment. Every eye in the room would watch them. Every scream they uttered would be believed. Every accusation they made would send someone to the gallows. Elizabeth was made to stand in the center of the room, alone. No lawyer to defend her, no family member to speak on her behalf. The Puritan legal system did not allow for defense attorneys in witchcraft cases, because to defend a witch was to align yourself with Satan, because the truth needed no defense, because innocence would shine through without any assistance, or so they claimed. The reality was simpler. They did not want anything interfering with their convictions. Judge Stoughton spoke first. His voice filled the room like thunder. Elizabeth Howe, you stand accused of witchcraft, of consorting with the devil, of using your powers to torment innocent people, of signing Satan's book and receiving his mark. How do you plead? The question was rhetorical. The answer did not matter, but Elizabeth had to give it anyway. She had to speak the words that would seal her fate one way or another. I am innocent, Elizabeth said. Her voice was barely a whisper. Weeks in a freezing cell, little food, less sleep had stolen her strength. I have never seen the devil. I have never hurt anyone. I am a good Christian girl. I swear before God, I am innocent. The words hung in the air, and Judge Stoughton smiled. Not a kind smile, a smile that said, I expected you to lie. Thank you for confirming my suspicions. Recite the Lord's Prayer, he commanded. Elizabeth began, Our Father, who art in heaven. Her voice shook, not because she could not remember the words, because she knew what would happen if she made a single mistake. Hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. She paused for breath, just for a second, just to steady herself, and Judge Stoughton's eyes narrowed. Continue, he said coldly, as if that pause was already proof. Elizabeth finished the prayer without error. The magistrates conferred in whispers. This was disappointing. They had hoped for a stumble, but no matter. They had other tests. Judge Stoughton gestured to the afflicted girls. "Let the accused look upon those she has tormented." Elizabeth raised her eyes. She looked at Mercy Lewis, and Mercy screamed. It was not a scream of fear, it was a scream of theater, a performance honed by weeks of practice. Mercy threw herself to the floor, her body convulsed. Her eyes rolled back in her head. She clawed at her throat as if invisible hands were choking her. "She's killing me," Mercy shrieked. "Her specter is here. It's crushing my chest. I cannot breathe." The other girls joined in, a chorus of screams, a symphony of suffering, all perfectly synchronized. The audience gasped. Some prayed, some cried. They were watching evil in action, or so they believed. They were seeing proof that the devil walked among them, that Elizabeth Howe, this 14-year-old girl in chains, had the power to torture people with her gaze alone. And Elizabeth stood frozen, unable to defend herself, unable to stop the performance, knowing that everything she said would be used against her. "Touch them," Judge Stoughton ordered. Guards grabbed Elizabeth and dragged her toward the convulsing girls. They forced her to place her hands on Mercy Lewis's writhing form. And instantly, Mercy went still. She opened her eyes. She sat up slowly. "The witch has released me," she said in a trembling voice. "Her touch broke the spell." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Here was proof, undeniable proof. Only a witch could stop a bewitchment. But the examination was not over. The magistrates had more questions. They asked Elizabeth about her birthmark. She admitted it existed. She explained it had been there since birth. She begged them to understand it meant nothing. Judge Stoughton wrote notes. His quill scratching against paper was the only sound in the room after she finished speaking. Then he looked up. "The examining women have confirmed the devil's mark," he said. "You bear Satan's signature upon your flesh." They asked Elizabeth about John Howe's cattle. Had she cursed them? Had she caused their deaths through witchcraft? Elizabeth said no. She had simply walked past the farm. She had done nothing. She barely remembered the incident. "So you admit you were near the cattle before they died," Judge Sewell said, leaning forward. "You admit you were present at the scene of the crime." It was a trap. Every answer was a trap. Admit nothing, and you were lying. Admit anything, and you were confessing. The examination lasted hours. The magistrates circled the same questions again and again. Different words, same accusations, trying to catch Elizabeth in a contradiction, trying to exhaust her into confessing. The afflicted girls would periodically scream and fall into fits whenever Elizabeth spoke, interrupting her denials with their performances. The audience watched in rapt attention. This was better than any sermon. This was good versus evil playing out in real time. As the sun began to set, Judge Stoughton finally called for silence. He looked at Elizabeth with something that might have been pity if it were not so condescending. "You have one opportunity to save your soul," he said. "Confess your sins. Admit you have trafficked with the devil. Name the other witches in your coven. Do this, and you may yet find mercy. Continue in your lies, and you will hang. The choice is yours." This was the moment. This was the impossible decision that dozens of accused witches had faced before Elizabeth. Confess to a lie and betray everything you believe in, or maintain your innocence and die. Some historians argue it was not really a choice, that survival is the only rational option. But those historians were not 14 years old, standing alone in a courtroom full of people who wanted them dead. Those historians did not have to live with the aftermath. Elizabeth looked at the judges. She looked at the afflicted girls. She looked at the audience. She saw no sympathy, no compassion, no willingness to believe her. She saw only conviction. These people had decided she was guilty before she ever entered the room. The trial was not about discovering truth. It was about confirming what they already believed. It was about giving their persecution the veneer of legality. It was about making murder look like justice. "I have nothing to confess," Elizabeth said. Her voice was steady now, stronger than it had been all day, because she had made her choice. "I am innocent. I have never seen the devil. I have never practiced witchcraft. I will not lie to save my life. I will not condemn others with false testimony. I am innocent, and God knows I am innocent, and that will have to be enough." The courtroom fell silent. Judge Stoughton's face hardened. He had given her mercy, or what he considered mercy, and she had rejected it. She had chosen damnation. She had sealed her own fate. He banged his gavel once. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Elizabeth Howe, you are remanded to custody pending trial. May God have mercy on your soul, because this court will not." Elizabeth returned to her cell, a condemned girl. The examination had gone exactly as the magistrates wanted. They had their evidence. They had their witnesses. They had a girl who refused to confess and therefore deserved to hang. The trial itself, when it came, would be a formality, a brief proceeding before the execution. Justice, they would call it. Murder disguised in legal robes. But something changed in the days that followed. Something that would alter Elizabeth's fate and reveal the deepest cruelty of the Salem witch trials. Because the magistrates had discovered a problem. A strategic complication that threatened their entire enterprise. Too many people were maintaining their innocence. Too many were choosing death over false confession. And the community was beginning to ask uncomfortable questions. The logic of the witch hunt required confessions. Without them, how could the authorities prove the threat was real? How could they justify the arrests, the trials, the executions? A witch who denied being a witch could be dismissed as a liar. But a witch who confessed, who named names, who provided details about midnight ceremonies and devil worship, that was proof. That validated everything. That made the terror necessary. So the magistrates made a deal with the devil, though they would never have called it that. They decided that those who confessed would be spared, not freed, not declared innocent, but kept alive in prison as witnesses against others. Meanwhile, those who maintained their innocence would hang. The message was clear and perverse. Truth will kill you, only lies can save you. Integrity is a luxury you cannot afford. Elizabeth learned of this policy from the other prisoners. Whispered conversations in the darkness. Stories of women who had confessed and been moved to better cells. Women who were given food and clean water. Women who were no longer beaten or chained. Women who had traded their souls for their lives. And Elizabeth understood what was being offered to her. Survival. At a price. The pressure to confess came from multiple directions. First, from the other prisoners, women who had already made the choice and needed Elizabeth to make the same one. "Just tell them what they want to hear," they whispered. "It does not matter if it is true. God will know your heart. God will forgive you. But you must live. You cannot do good from the grave." The logic was seductive. The rationalization was ready-made. Then came the visits from ministers. Men who claimed to care about Elizabeth's soul. Men who sat with her in her cell and prayed over her and begged her to confess for her own good. Reverend Paris himself came, the man whose household had started this entire nightmare. He looked at Elizabeth with what he probably thought was compassion. "I do not want to see you hang, child," he said. "Confess your sins. Renounce Satan. Come back to God's grace. It is not too late." But the cruelest pressure came from her own family. They were allowed to visit once. Just once. Her mother came, her father, her younger siblings. They were not allowed to touch her. They stood on the other side of the bars and wept. And they begged her to confess, not because they believed she was guilty, but because they wanted her to live. "Please," her mother sobbed. "Please, Elizabeth, just tell them what they want to hear. We will know the truth. God will know the truth. But please do not leave us." Elizabeth was 14 years old. She had been in prison for 6 weeks. She had been starved and frozen and terrorized. She had watched other prisoners go mad from the conditions. She had heard the screams of women being interrogated. She had listened to the sound of hammers building a gallows outside. And now she faced the choice that would define the rest of her life: die with integrity intact, or live with the knowledge that she had betrayed everything she believed in. The mathematics of survival are brutal. 20 people would eventually be executed in the Salem witch trials. 14 women and 6 men, 19 by hanging, 1 pressed to death under heavy stones for refusing to enter a plea. But over 50 people confessed, and every single one of them lived. Not one confessed witch was executed. The lesson was inescapable. Confession equals survival. Denial equals death. The truth is not a defense. The truth is a sentence. Elizabeth asked for a Bible. The guards laughed. Witches were not allowed Bibles. But she asked again and again, until finally, a minister brought one to her cell. She read the Gospel of Matthew, the part about Peter denying Christ 3 times. Peter, who loved Jesus more than anyone. Peter, who swore he would die before betraying him. And Peter, who heard the rooster crow and realized he had done exactly what he swore he would never do. Peter survived his betrayal. Peter went on to build the church. Would God forgive Elizabeth if she did the same? On the 53rd day of her imprisonment, Elizabeth told the guards she was ready to confess. She was brought before the magistrates once more. This time, the courtroom was less crowded. Confessions were routine now. Dozens of people had already admitted to witchcraft. This was just one more. But for Elizabeth, it was the end of her childhood. The end of the girl who believed truth mattered. The beginning of something else. Something harder. Something necessary. Judge Stoughton looked at her with satisfaction. "You are prepared to confess your crimes?" he asked. Elizabeth nodded. She could not trust her voice yet. "Speak," he commanded. "Let the court hear your admission of guilt." And Elizabeth spoke the words that would save her life and haunt her forever. "I am a witch," she said. The lie tasted like ashes. "I signed the devil's book. He came to me in my room. He promised me power. He promised me wealth. I was weak. I was sinful. I gave myself to him." The words came easier now, because they were not her words. They were a script, a performance. Everyone in the room had heard this confession 100 times before. It followed the expected pattern. It confirmed what they already believed. "Who else was there?" Judge Stoughton asked. This was the crucial question, the one that made confessions valuable. Elizabeth had to name names. She had to implicate others. She had to spread the infection. Sarah Good, Elizabeth said, naming a woman already condemned. Tituba, Sarah Osborne. All safe names. All women who had already confessed or been executed. She did not name anyone new. She would not send another innocent person to this nightmare. She would lie to save herself. But she would not become a murderer. The magistrates accepted her confession. They asked for more details. Elizabeth provided them. She described midnight ceremonies that never happened. She described flying through the air and dancing with demons. She described signing her name in the devil's book with her own blood. Every word was a lie. Every word was believed. Every word moved her one step further from the gallows. When it was over, Elizabeth was moved to a better cell. She was given food, clean water, a blanket. The chains were removed from her wrists and ankles. She was told she would live. She was told she had been saved. And Elizabeth sat in her new cell and understood what she had done. She had purchased her life with lies. She had survived by becoming exactly what they accused her of being. Not a witch, but something worse. A collaborator, a participant in her own persecution. The other confessed witches welcomed her. They treated her like she had joined their club. And in a way, she had. The club of people who chose survival over truth. The club of people who would carry their shame for the rest of their lives. The club of people who had learned the most important lesson Salem had to teach. The world does not reward integrity. The world rewards those who know when to lie. Elizabeth Howe would live, but at what cost? The girl who walked into that courtroom did not walk out. She died there. She was replaced by someone harder. Someone who understood that survival sometimes requires betrayal. Someone who would never again believe that truth would set her free. Because in Salem, Massachusetts, in the year of our Lord 1692, the truth would only get you killed. Elizabeth Howe survived. Let us be clear about what that word means. Her heart continued beating. Her lungs continued drawing breath. Her body walked out of Salem prison in May of 1693, when Governor William Phips finally ordered the release of all accused witches. But survival is not the same as living. And the girl who emerged from that cell was not the same girl who had been dragged into it 15 months earlier. The witch hunt ended not with revelation or justice, but with exhaustion. By the autumn of 1692, over 200 people had been accused. The jails could hold no more. The executioner's rope had claimed 20 lives. And finally, people began to ask questions. Dangerous questions. Questions like, what if we are wrong? What if these are not witches, but neighbors? What if we have become the monsters we claim to be fighting? The turning point came when the accusations reached too high. When the afflicted girls pointed their fingers at the wife of Governor Phips himself. When they accused people of such obvious respectability that even the most fervent believers had to pause. When Cotton Mather, one of the chief architects of the hunt, began to express doubts about spectral evidence. When the machinery of persecution threatened to devour even those who had built it. Governor Phips shut down the court of Oyer and Terminer in October of 1692. He forbade the use of spectral evidence in any future trials. And suddenly, without dreams and visions as testimony, there was no case against anyone. The remaining accused were released. The confessed witches, including Elizabeth, were set free. The nightmare was over. Except it was not over. It would never be over. not for those who had lived through it. Elizabeth returned to a home that felt like a tomb. Her family welcomed her with tears and embraces, but there was a distance now, a space that had not existed before, because they had begged her to lie, and she had. And now they all had to live with what that meant. Her mother could not look at her without crying. Her father grew silent and withdrawn. Her siblings treated her like something fragile and dangerous. A survivor, a collaborator, a reminder of shame. The community tried to forget. This is what communities always do after they commit atrocities. They move on. They rebuild. They tell themselves it was a difficult time and everyone did their best, and let us never speak of it again. But the dead do not allow themselves to be forgotten so easily. 19 corpses hung from Gallows Hill. Their families remembered. Their ghosts haunted every street corner. Their silence screamed louder than any accusation. In 1697, 5 years after the trials, the Massachusetts General Court ordered a day of fasting and prayer in atonement for the witch hunt. Samuel Sewell, one of the judges, stood in church and publicly apologized. He read a statement taking blame and begging forgiveness. It was a remarkable moment, a powerful act of contrition, and it changed nothing. The dead remained dead. The survivors remained broken. An apology cannot resurrect the hanged or restore the innocence of those who confessed to survive. Elizabeth lived to see Ann Putnam, one of the chief accusers, stand before the congregation in 1706 and apologize for her role. Anne claimed she had been deluded by Satan, that she had truly believed the accusations she made, that she was sorry for the harm she caused. The congregation forgave her, because that is what good Christians do. They forgive. But Elizabeth, sitting in the back pew, did not feel forgiveness. She felt rage. Cold, quiet rage that would burn in her chest for the rest of her life. What does it mean to survive something like this? What does it mean to carry the weight of forced confession for decades? Elizabeth married. She had children. She attended church every Sunday. She lived what appeared to be a normal life. But those who knew her said she never smiled quite the same way, that there was something in her eyes, something distant, something that had seen too much darkness to ever fully return to the light. The Salem witch trials were not an aberration. They were not a unique moment of madness in an otherwise rational society. They were a warning, a demonstration of what happens when fear becomes permission, when authority demands conformity over truth, when communities need villains more than they need justice. The specific beliefs may have been about witches and devils, but the mechanism is timeless. Find a scapegoat. Create a system that punishes denial and rewards false confession. Let terror do the rest. We like to think we are different now, more enlightened, more rational. We look back at Salem and shake our heads at the ignorance of our ancestors. How could they believe in witchcraft? How could they execute people based on dreams? How could an entire community participate in such obvious injustice? But the question is not how could they. The question is how quickly could we? How fast would we abandon our principles when we are afraid? How easily would we become accusers if it meant protecting ourselves? The witch hunt endures because the human psychology that created it endures. The need to explain suffering by finding someone to blame. The comfort of simple narratives about good and evil. The power that comes from accusation without evidence. The social pressure to conform, even when conformity means participating in cruelty. These are not relics of the 17th century. These are features of human, and they emerge whenever conditions are right. Elizabeth, Howe died in 1724 at the age of 46. The records do not say what killed her. Perhaps disease, perhaps exhaustion, perhaps she simply grew tired of carrying the weight. She was buried in the church cemetery. No special marker, no mention of what she endured. Just another name on another stone. The community had already forgotten, but history remembers. We remember, because we must. The story of the girl who survived a witch hunt is not ultimately about survival. It is about the cost of survival. It is about the impossible choices we face when systems of power demand our complicity. It is about the lies we tell to stay alive and the truths we sacrifice to get through the day. It is about the fact that sometimes the only way to escape the fire is to help build the pyre. Elizabeth confessed to save her life. She collaborated with her persecutors. She became part of the machine that was destroying innocent people. And she lived. We can judge her for that choice. We can say she should have maintained her integrity and died with honor. But we are not 14 years old in chains in a frozen cell facing execution. We have not been starved and terrorized and told that truth will get us killed. We have not had to choose between our souls and our survival. And until we face that choice, we have no right to judge those who did. The legacy of Salem is not that witch hunts happened. The legacy is that they worked. They achieved their goal. They purged the community of unwanted elements. They reinforced social hierarchies. They allowed powerful men to demonstrate their power. They gave frightened people someone to blame for their suffering. And they taught everyone a lesson about the consequences of nonconformity. The system functioned exactly as designed. The horror is that it was not a failure. It was a success. Tonight, wherever you are, whatever time it is, look around your world. Ask yourself, who are the witches now? Who are the people your community has decided deserve persecution? Who are the scapegoats blamed for problems they did not create? And ask yourself the harder question, would you have the courage to stand with them? Or would you, like Elizabeth, like most of us, choose survival over solidarity? Choose safety over truth? Choose life over integrity? If you found value in this exploration of one girl's impossible choice, if you believe these stories from our darkest chapters deserve to be told and retold until we finally learn from them, consider subscribing to Echoes of the Old World. Let me know in the comments, would you have confessed or would you have hung? And be honest, because the answer matters. It matters more than we want to admit. The girl who survived a witch hunt learned that survival is not always victory, that living can be its own form of dying, that the ghosts we carry are heavier than the chains we escape. Elizabeth. Howe walked out of Salem prison alive, but she left her childhood, her innocence, and her faith in justice behind those bars. And she spent the rest of her life haunted by the question we all must answer eventually. What are you willing to sacrifice to survive? And when you look in the mirror afterward, will you recognize the person looking back? Sleep well tonight. And remember that the witch hunts never truly end. They just change costumes. They just find new targets. They just wait for the next moment when fear becomes permission and neighbors become executioners. The story is not over. It is still being written. And we are all characters in it, whether we want to be or not. Until next time, this has been Echoes of the Old World.